And we stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of the 1960s, the frontier of unknown opportunities and perils, the frontier of unfilled hope and unfilled threats.
Well, I first met Kennedy at the 56th convention. I was a delegate from New Jersey. And supposedly the convention would be open. And everybody had their little campaigns for who was going to be vice president. Adlai Stevenson said that it was going to be an open convention. And so there were some people from Massachusetts that I knew from the war days who were friends of Kennedy. And they introduced us. And we had this little boomlet for vice president, and I got some of the people in New Jersey, and we started to stir things up for Kennedy to be vice president. And it was the best thing that ever happened. He lost, because nobody would have probably heard of him again. And that's how I first met him. Then, shortly thereafter, I was elected to Congress. And then we became friends. Then, after I was in Congress, then it appeared that now he was going to get serious about running for president in '60. So we'd meet every once in a while, and maybe every couple of weeks or so, and maybe have a sandwich over at his office. And we go over what some of the people in New Jersey might feel about it, the leadership, whether the governor might be for him, whether the political leaders, and so we became quite friendly. And he was a funny guy. We would go over there were 4 or 5 leaders in New Jersey in those days, political leaders, and then he said to me, we went over where they might be, and then he said, well, what about the governor? And I said, well, I don't know. He said, well, let me see if I can give you the reasons why he'll never be for me. I said, okay. And he says, well, he'll never be for me no matter what happens, because, first of all, he says, he's anti-Catholic. He's a fallen away Catholic himself. So now he's vigorously anti-Catholic, and he feels that no Catholic could ever win. And he said, and the other reason was, he said that up until now, he said, he's been a bright young thing in the Democratic Party. And he says, I'm younger than he is. He said, but Neil, I want to tell you what the real reason is. He says, I take a better picture than that son of a bitch, you'll never forgive me. And you know what? That's what it really boiled down to in the end, too.
When was this?
It was the morning after the nomination and the '60 convention. Adam Clayton Powell, when they were stripping him of his committee. I was one of the council trying to keep him in the committee chairman, me and Ben Rosenthal of New York. Yeah, yes, there's no question about that. I think the policies of Dulles and the standoffishness of President Eisenhower, who sort of had the admiration of the world for his role in the war, but policy was really driven by Dulles, though revisionist history says that the man behind it all was Eisenhower, which probably true. I think he was more of a manager than one who was making policy. I think that Dulles added to the policies of Truman and Atchison, and left no room for the diminution of the Cold War. I think Kennedy viewed that as one of his great responsibilities, to reduce those tensions, because everybody was still talking about a nuclear war. I mean, we're talking about a terrorist plot right now, but a nuclear war was the end of the world for many, many people, and I think Kennedy took that very, very seriously, how to reduce the tensions and not fall into a war. And of course, he was highly tested by Khrushchev. I remember talking to him, being over there when he came back from the meeting with Khrushchev, and I was asking him, how'd you find Khrushchev? How'd you get along with him? He said, he was a son of a bitch. We got talking about it a little bit, and I said, well, how did it end? Well, he knew that I was no good son of a bitch too at the end. And when his farewell was, he said, I asked Khrushchev, what's that medal you wore all the time? He says, that's the Lenin Peace Medal. And Kennedy said, I hope you're still wearing it the next time we meet. So, but he was, and of course Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs really did not trust the military leadership too much, and you still had, like General LeMay and those guys who sock 'em, nuke 'em, and get 'em out of there, and for a young president following a great general, that was a very difficult course for him to play. Sergeant Schreiber, Peace Corps.
Oh yeah, I kind of want to see that Peace Corps thing they signed.
That's in here. That's the Peace Corps bill there.
Can you say something real quick about it?
Well, this was Schreiber. This was Hubert Humphrey. The president signed it. I don't know what the hell he was saying. That's me there, Chairman Morgan. And that one up there was I managed there was a UN bond resolution to, when the UN went broke, I handled the legislation creating the financing for the UN. That was Adlai Stevenson next to me. He ran for president twice against Eisenhower. And the little guy is Carl Albert, the new speaker. Well, not like a heart-to-heart talk like this, but I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee, so I would be in on the conversations in the White House. I handled and helped draft the Peace Corps, and you could know where he wanted to go with that. I helped draft that, and then I was the co-manager of the passage of the Peace Corps on the floor. There's a picture there with the pen and all of signing. And I also introduced and managed the bill creating the Arms Control Agency on it. So on matters like that, yes, Kennedy was for real in in the question of America's role internationally. And of course, he did give hope to all the young people and all of the people around the world had fought in the war. It was sort of our turn to be on the stage. And in that way, he really, truly was a leader of the world's hope that a new generation was aware of the problems and were intelligent enough and courageous enough to want to try and solve those problems while America still had its leadership role and while people still really looked up to the United States on it. And he was ideal for that period. There was no question about it. I was convinced from the day after. In fact, there's a story right there as you walk in there. The day that the president was killed, I was in my office, and Bob Michael, who became Republican minority leader, his office is next door to mine. And he ran into my office and he said, "The president's just been shot." And I didn't have a radio. We didn't have radios in there. And I went over to Bob's office, listening to what was going on. And I had been shot a couple of times, so I didn't really think this tough guy was going to be dead. I said, I was kidding. I said, "Well, geez, it looks like we're going to win this election." You know, it's a little like the Reagan thing later on. But then, as I was there, my secretary came in and said, "Speaker McCormick, would you like to come over to his office right away?" I was sort of a protege of the speaker in those days. And then I went over to the speaker's office, and there were a lot of people mulling around, and I said to him, I said, there were a lot of reporters were there. I said, you got to get some kind of statement here. And of course, he was really, he didn't know what the hell was going on whether the president was dead or whatever the hell it was. So I started to draft up a dictated statement from the speaker to his secretary. And while we're working on it, one of the other secretaries came out and said, "President's dead." And of course that changed the whole game. Now, Secret Service, everybody starts showing up in Speaker's office because he's next in line. We don't know whether there's some kind of a big conspiracy going on. And so I stayed there, and we waited now to see what was going on next. And then the word came through as to what time the plane would come in. So I went out. Then the speaker asked me to drive out to the airport with him. And we went out with Carl Albert, the new majority leader, and Mr. Russell from Georgia. And we went out and waited for the plane to come in with the president's body. So, and there's a story on there, was where were you that day, you know. So, in fact, when it got out there, there's some colonel had set up some microphones and told the speaker that when the plane came in, this is where the new president would come over. And then I looked over to my left, and I see this guy walking up and down next to a tanker there, a gasoline truck, and it was Bobby Kennedy, all by himself. So I went over, and he's walking up and down. I started walking. I put my arm around him, and we walked up and down for a while. And what the hell could you say? And the only thing I remember him saying, a couple of things, is that old man's hand's in there someplace. I don't know. Then I didn't want to press him because he was crying, and so then we just kept walking up and down, and then they got notified the plane was coming in, and then I went back over to see if Mr. McCormick was all right, and then the plane came in, and somehow or other, and I never figured out what the hell he did, but Bobby got on that damn plane and walked off with Jackie Kennedy and the casket. And then the new president come over, and the new game was on. But I don't know how I got diverted to that, about the assassination. The day after the president was killed, I remember making notes. I don't even know where the hell they are now. I was convinced that if there was a conspiracy on it, if there was a conspiracy, there was only one group that could have brought it off, and that was Hoover. And Hoover hated the Kennedys. He thought that both of them were national security threats. They were too young. And most of all, they didn't like each other. And Hoover was very protective of his goddamn job. I never could figure out whether or not he really set up Oswald or not. But I became convinced, and as time went on, that it's hard to bring back those days. But everybody was communist happy in those days. I mean, there were communists under the rug, under your bed, all over. And this guy, Lee Harvey Oswald, had been to Russia. He had been a Marine. He came back, and no one ever went into the Russian embassy. And this came out in the papers when Drew Pearson was a writer in those days, a muckraker. Anybody went into the Russian embassy, across the street, the FBI was taking pictures of everybody. And everybody who went into the Russian embassy was investigated. So here you had a guy came back from Russia, was known to the FBI, went to the FBI. The FBI investigated him, and was on loose, and nobody knew what the hell was going on. And yet, there's no way that the FBI could not have been monitoring Lee Harvey Oswald all the time, because they monitored everybody. It was an employment thing for FBI agents. Another guy went into the embassy, put 2 more agents on him. Everybody was bugged and monitored on it. And as it went on, then the Clay Shore group down there that he was obviously involved with on it. And any prosecutor today can make any kind of a conspiracy that he wants. Here you had a group of goddamn people discuss killing the President of the United States, of which a guy by the name of Oswald was familiar with them on it and met with them. And yet the FBI found no conspiracy on it. And they try to make it a joke that it was just a group of homosexuals down there. Sure, that playing games about what they do with the president. They kill him because he was such a sex symbol, you know. It was a joke around in those days. They try to belittle the Clay Shore group. And yet there's no question in my mind that the Clay Shore group, and this is what Boggs insisted on, that he didn't understand that at that moment, why he wanted to open up the Warren Commission. Because there's no question that group did discuss it. Oswald was in touch with them, and the president was killed. And he got all of these connections, and yet nobody wanted to take a look. And when you got a spooky son of a bitch like Shaw involved in the middle of this, from his background, there was no way that whether they set up, gave him the gun or not, who the hell knew? But I always thought there was one sure thing that I'm sure, and everybody else was in that period. Hoover knew every goddamn thing that was going on everywhere. Our Congress was bugged. I hired a guy from the White House, a guy named Captain Hartnett. He was a signals officer. The Speaker asked me to find somebody who could see whether the officers are being bugged, because we knew they were being bugged. We took a guy from the signals office of the White House. He was an Army captain. And we hired him from the clerk's office to see what we could do about bugging the congressional officers on it. And his conclusion was, nothing you can do about it, because the same people that we were doing the debugging are the people who were putting the bugs in anyhow on it. So it was so bad, and the FBI was behind all of this. And so Hoover had to know what he knew what everybody was doing. That's a general statement, but interesting people. But they had to know what this guy from Russia running around, Lee Harvey Oswald, had to know what he's doing. I always thought that Hoover and his special group moved all the opposition, like in a football game. Take out all the defenders and walk into the goal line on it. I think that's exactly what the hell happened. And if there was a conspiracy, only Hoover and his special group could have killed the president. And to this day, I feel that that's what happened. Even more so today, and I think the killing of the president was the perfect sting. That we now, just like yesterday, they'll get some damn moron and surround them with informers and FBI agents, tell him how to get his 1,000-pound bomb. How would an ignorant moron like that guy they captured yesterday know where to buy a 1,000-pound bomb? And the guy who parked his car in New York. The whole security apparatus today relies on these stings where they get these moronic guys who say, yeah, I want to blow this up, I want to blow that up. Before you know it, a whole team shows, oh, you want to blow something up? We'll show you where to blow it up. We'll show you how to buy the truck, where to park the truck. Like on the first bombing of the World Trade Center. You had an Egyptian colonel that they inserted into those the guys who blew that up at that time. The FBI gave him $1 million, $1 million, to show them how to make bombs, and and rent a farm here in New Jersey, rented a Ryder's truck, and the colonel disappears, and they blow up the basement of the World Trade Center in, what was that, 93 or something, whatever it was, before the main one. So the whole underground spook apparatus is based on stings and informers on it. And I am convinced to this day that Oswald became the designated patsy. Whether he wanted to kill the president or not, who the hell knows? Did he kill the president? He probably did. But was the way paved for him? Was the setup with Jack Ruby another way to put closure to the whole damn thing? And you got a wacko groupie, a cop groupie like Jack Ruby, who incidentally, Jerry O'Leary, I started to tell you that before. Jerry O'Leary won a Pulitzer, he was a reporter for the Washington Star, won the Pulitzer Prize for the killing of Lee Harvey Oswald. When the Life Stories came out, Jerry Leary came up to my house here and spent 3 days with us, wanting to know about this Life Stories. And we became very good friends. And I said, how the hell did you get into that tunnel or whatever the hell it was to be next to Jack Ruby? He said, Deke DeLoach put me there. He said, we were neighbors in Virginia, and I knew him very well. And he got the guy, Jerry got a lot of good stories to the FBI. He was one of those guys that they leaked to. He was a good writer. He was a good guy. When we see how well these things are carried out today, people didn't understand stings in those days. But the killing of the president, in my mind, was the perfect goddamn thing. And only Hoover and those guys, or the tight guys around him, would know that. The president signed that in the Carlisle Hotel. That was Secretary of State Russ, that's me. This is Kenny O'Donnell. Kenny was the real closest guy to the president.
Where are you?
Right there.
Wow. Talking to Rusk.
Yeah. That was a great guy. He's the best guy beside Kennedy in the administration, Kenny O'Donnell.
Oh, yeah?
I saw him grab Bobby Kennedy in the Oval Office, throw him against the wall. Said, what's more important, your hard-on for Roy Cohn or the president's Bill of Rights legislation concerning Hale Boggs? I didn't have a deep discussion with Garretson on the issues, but we did talk generally about the assassination and about this Clay Shore group, and that these guys were in his area. A conspiracy would have been a conspiracy any place in the country, that any DA could have made a conspiracy charge, and yet they were disparaging Garretson, that there wasn't, and they didn't have jurisdiction, and what the hell was he doing? And all this was a group of homos, and why are they taking it seriously, and things like this. But by this time, Hale was taking such a beating like I was taking from the FBI, that he really now began to totally believe that it was all a setup. And if you looked at the committee, the Warren Commission, it was the Chief Justice, and then it was John McCloy, John McCloy, the chairman of the board, Alan Dulles. In the House it was Jerry Ford and Hale, and then John Cooper and McClellan from the Senate. That was the committee. Now, the Chief Justice really never got involved in it. By that time, he was a little shaky, to tell you the truth. I knew him. He was a nice man. But it was inconceivable of him to, at that point of his life, to think anything was going on. McCloy is the guy who did all the work. And he wrote the opinion along with the support of Dulles. And I asked President Johnson one time, how did you come to put Alan Dulles on there, who was an enemy of Kennedy's? And he just avoided the whole question on it. And then we were pretty friendly, Johnson and I. But he just avoided the whole question. But again, if Hoover didn't set this whole thing up, then there was only one other guy who could have done it, and that was Alan Dulles, because Alan Dulles' job in Europe during World War II was to run assassination committees, groups all around Europe when he was head of the OSS over there. So to this day, I can't understand why they put Dulles on there, because at that time he was fired. He was an enemy of Kennedy. He hated Kennedy, of course, more than the Cubans did, because he fired him from CIA. So there was so much mysterious stuff that went on during that thing. It just couldn't be that there was nothing else to it. There was so much intrigue spinning around Hoover and the special group. Yeah, that's me. That's old Senator Claude Pepper from Roosevelt days, and they came back into the House. He was one of the lions of the Roosevelt administration. That's Teddy. This is President Park, Korea, my wife.
Oh, the president of Korea.
Mm-hmm.
He's famous over there.
His wife, his daughter, was just elected president. Well, the effect of it was, I think it associated with raising questions of deep questions that we had ignored about the meaning of life, the mortality and the shortness of life, the quickness of it, the why hope, why plan, when a guy like Kennedy, who had it all going for him, could be wiped out. And
when a president can be killed.
Yeah. Not only a president, but that president, who was strong, good-looking, and had everything going for him, and all the money and the life and all the girls and everything else he might have wanted. But that particular president, who, when he became president, inspired hope not only in this country and among all the young people, the new generation, the people who were not only in the war generation, but the younger people with the Peace Corps, and that their voices would be heard, and there was a place for them to say things and study, and a reason to live and have a place to participate in their government and in their future. I think that was all wrapped up in Kennedy, and I think it was all blown apart when Kennedy was killed. How does it compare today? I don't sense that there is that sense of commonality that existed during that period among people today. My office was very close to the public entrance, on the street entrance in the Capitol there. And I heard this woman screaming, and she was getting an argument with a police officer by the door. And she's yelling, "I want to see a congressman, I want to see a congressman."
Yeah.
I think that's in the book, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's how I started.
Your office was close to the door. Yeah.
I was close to the door, and then this woman who had her daughter with her, who went down for an interview for a clerk typist or clerk receptionist, and then she had to go through this a lie detector test, and they're asking all about religion, all about her sex life, and all of this stuff. And then when she didn't have an interesting sex life, since what the hell, she's only 17, then the operator asked her, "Well, are you some kind of a lesbian? Do you sleep with girls?" and stuff like that. She broke, ran home to Mama. Mama ran up and looking for a congressman. I said, "Well, I'm a congressman. Which congressman do you want?" And she didn't care who it was. And really, I had 4 daughters, and it just triggered something in me that, Jesus, can our government be possibly doing this sort of stuff to people? And as a result, I wrote to every agency in our government. Are you giving lie detector tests? For what purpose? As to where's the funds coming from? What's the training? And that's really how it all started. And then there was press on it, and I got a hearing held on this. And in the course of about, 3 or 4 months, must have gotten about 28,000 letters. They were coming in with
Really?
with duffel bags full of mail.
28,000 letters of people who said this is
Abuses of the government.
Wow.
In different things.
Wow.
And really, that really woke me up, about all of these things that were going on that I never even thought about. I was just a little congressman thinking it's all on the level from Bayonne, and all of a sudden, I see my government is doing all of these terrible, terrible things. I then, as a result of that, I went over to the chairman of the Judiciary Committee and suggested that they look into this. And they wanted nothing to do with it. But again, I then spoke to the chairman of the Government Operations Committee and said, somebody ought to look into this. And well, to make a long story short, we held a hearing on it. And as a result, there were thousands of letters came in from the publicity of the hearing, that they were bringing letters in of government abuses to various people that were going on under our nose that none of us really were looking at. And one of the letters that I'd read some of the more abusive letters that were coming in was a woman who went to confession. She was a Catholic, and after she finished her confession, and somebody propositioned her, and when she said, "I'm not that kind of a girl," he then played back her confession. He had bugged the confession with a parabolic mic. I was again outraged at this sort of thing, being in the Congress, that we're not watching what is really going on and happening to the civil liberties of our people, and the effect that the new technologies were having on our society. I ran over and I saw Cardinal Spellman, who I had been introduced to by Roy Cohn at a luncheon sometime earlier. And I told him, I said, I have 4 daughters. They go to confession regularly. It's a sacrament of the Catholic Church. I'm a Catholic. And I said, what are we doing to protect our people from this sort of thing? And of course he said, I wouldn't worry about it, my son. I said, well, who is worrying about it? And he said, well, he said, probably Mr. Hoover's protecting us. Well, the only people in those days really had that kind of equipment were the security agencies, including the FBI. So that was not reassuring. I then went and spoke to the chairman and said, we really ought to create some sort of a center here to get into this, what was privacy, which later became a buzzword. And the chairman, Dawson, Bill Dawson, and the speaker approved of a special 3-man committee. And I was named the chairman of it. And that's really how I got into the privacy issue, because no one else wanted to look at it. The Judiciary Committee did not want to look at it, and because it bordered on some of the law enforcement agencies. But my concerns were greater than that, and we were not trying to intrude on the jurisdiction of anybody else. I mean, we held hearings on personality testing. We held hearings on the data banks. We got into the business of the Army's surveillance system, where you have the military now in cooperation with the FBI. Now we're setting up a surveillance system in every county in America. We're reporting, and the Army had all this computer time because they had the computers and didn't know what to do with them really in those days. So law enforcement then cooked up the scheme about the surveillance of civilians to see, you know, whether who was a commie next door, and we stirred the pot up a little bit. But everybody suddenly is scared of the FBI, scared of Hoover, scared of his spokes, scared of the various people who are now complaining of their offices being bugged. In fact, I was appointed by the Speaker to head a small, quiet group to see how we could protect our offices from being bugged on it. And in fact, we hired away from the White House the chief, Captain Harnett from the Signal Corps, who we put him on a clerk's payroll in order to see how we could protect our offices from being bugged. And of course, everybody thought it was Hoover on it, and who could do anything about it? And the report came back. The very people that we would hire to debug were the people who were bugging. You know, it was a small, closed group. So you were doing away with even the protections of privacy. And in those days, by now, the only two who were really battling Hoover are Hale Boggs and myself. And I didn't volunteer to battle Hoover. You know, when I was a little kid, I thought the Junior G-Man was a nice badge that all the kids in the neighborhood could get, you know. And I thought it was all for real. But now, when I went down to Congress, and Roy Cohn, who was a friend of mine, in fact, I represented Roy when he got indicted. He and the whole board of directors of the Union News got indicted in New Jersey for the distribution of pornographic literature. There was Confidential magazine and another one named Nugget. They were bosomy girls, but they were clothed. But they sold them at Newark Airport and in a newsstand. And Union News had all of these newsstands in the airports and things. And they were indicted, and a friend of mine who was a federal judge, a guy named Coulahan, asked me if I would meet Roy Cohn. This was at the Al Smith dinner in New York. And it was at the Statler Hotel. And I said, what the hell do I want to meet Roy Cohn for? You know, I hated everything McCarthy stood for. In fact, my political career was nearly ruined when I was a freeholder in Hudson County, when I think I was 27 or something, 28, something like that. And that's a county commissioner. You know what a freeholder is? in New Jersey, we don't have county commissioners. We call them freeholders. And that's the board that governs each county on it. So, it was a pretty big job in those days. And I ran and I was elected, and now I was one of the big men all of a sudden in Bayonne, my city. The freeholder made more money than the mayor did, and had Bayonne, and so now I belong to a parish called St. Mary's Parish Catholic Church in Bayonne. And now a group came to me and wanted me to go down to the railroad station and meet Senator McCarthy and introduce him at the communion breakfast. I said, why would I want to go and meet Joe McCarthy? Because I'm an Irish Catholic. All Irish Catholics are supposed to be for Joe McCarthy, right? I said, that guy is one of the most terrible men running around this country, ruining people's lives, and why would he even be coming? And I refused to go down and meet him. And not only that, I boycotted the communion breakfast, which, every aspiring politician likes to go to those little rallies where you got a lot of people there. And so I said I absolutely refused to go. And I hated everything that McCarthy stood for. And I guess it was contrary to what you're supposed to be if you're an Irish Catholic from Bayonne, But I had an innate feeling against injustice, and that was one of the most provocateurs of injustice in America in those days, what he was doing. So, and Roy was a spokesman. Roy was the guy that ran as a very young guy. He was counsel to the McCarthy Committee, and became famous on TV. And Roy would get all of this garbage that McCarthy would be waving, 29 communists, 72 communists in the State Department, and Roy who was a very big favorite of Hoover in those days, because as a very young assistant district attorney, federal U.S. attorney, he was one of the trial lawyers of the Rosenberg case, which was I don't know if you remember that or not. The Rosenbergs were the two spies, communist spies that were put to death. Roy tried the case. That's what made Roy a giant in the Republican conservative politics on it. Now, Roy became counsel to McCarthy's committee. And all the garbage, evidence that McCarthy had on communists, Hoover would give to Roy, and Roy was the chief counsel of the committee. That was the basis of it. So I hated Roy, I hated McCarthy, and everybody was part of it. I was only a little county commissioner in those days. So I wasn't in Congress. So I refused to go to that damn thing with McCarthy. Now, a couple of years passed, that's all over, and I'm at this dinner, and this Judge Coulihan asked me, would I meet Roy Cohn upstairs, and they had a room upstairs. And I don't want to meet that son of a bitch, So come on, do me a favor and all that. So that's how I met Roy Cohn. And then Coulihan asked me if I would represent the board of directors, including Roy. Now, on the board of directors was the president of the Citibank of not Citibank of New York, but that was the other big bank of New York, Bank of New York. The Cardinal Spellman's nephew, Morton Downey, the singer, very close with Joe Kennedy. I mean, these were really big guys, and I represented them. And it was a nothing case, I tried it, and it was thrown out. And I never sent him a bill. I never sent Roy a bill on it. But we became friends during this period. And he was an engaging guy. He was nuts. Roy was nuts, but he had a good sense of humor. He was funny. And we became friends. We had dinner, and we became friends. And all we'd ever do was scream at each other about McCarthy and what the hell this communist crap you guys are spreading around. So anyway, now I'm in Congress. Roy now asked me if I would put something in the congressional record about Mr. Hoover. You know, he got the Boy Scout Award of the Year or one of those, what we used to call good kid things. And anybody asked me to do it, and the other guys in Congress would do it. You'd put something in the congressional record, and then they'd make copies and send it around. It was like good PR. So what the hell did I know about Hoover? So I did that a couple times. And then one day, Roy, what the hell was the first one they had? Oh, he asked me if he could come down to my office and bring somebody with him. This guy was the head of the, he was counsel, what the hell was his name? Counsel to the Teamsters he was. And they come in with suitcases and wanted me, now I'm getting pretty well known nationally with the Privacy Committee. And it had nothing to do with law enforcement, nothing to do with law enforcement. I was involved in the polygraph, the psychological testing, the Minnesota MMPI, whatever the hell they call it, drugging kids, Ritalin, and the National Data Bank. It really started growing, maybe about 30, 40 campaigns. The campaign of the civilian surveillance system they installed, where the Army was now in law enforcement, involved with the local sheriff and local chief of police, exchanging information, data banks, drugging of kids, all these things. I avoided the law enforcement aspect of it because that was up to the Judiciary Committee. Now Cohn comes with Sid Zagre, the guy's name was, Sid Zagre. And they want me to hold a hearing on the law-breaking that the Department of Justice and the IRS were doing under Bobby Kennedy as the Attorney General. And man, it was terrible, terrible stuff. I mean, they must have had about 3 or 4 feet of evidence of affidavits and all of this. And I'm looking at this stuff, at what the hell our government was doing. And all of a sudden, I'm a little guy and a chairman of a 3-man privacy committee with a great budget of $25,000, which allowed us to have 1 man on that committee. And I'm supposed to be holding a hearing on the Justice Department and the Internal Revenue Service, which were now, I could see, were pitted against the FBI. And they asked me to hold this hearing. And I said, Roy, where the hell did you get this stuff? I mean, this is dynamite. And he said, I can't say. I said, listen, where the hell did you get it, or we don't talk anymore? He says, Mr. Hoover gave this to me. And he would request it as a personal favor if you would hold these hearings. He didn't like what Bobby Kennedy was doing, what the Justice Department is doing, and the IRS. And I said, Roy, I can't get into this kind of stuff. I just will not get into it. First of all, I don't have the jurisdiction, I don't have the staff, and I have no inclination to get involved in the goddamn war between Bobby Kennedy and J Edgar Hoover on it. That's way out of my goddamn league. I'm just interested in these little new technical devices like computers and things that are having an effect on people's lives in this country on it. And then Zagre then says, he says, well, listen, we'll contribute $100,000 to your campaign on it. And he said, you'll have the full support of the Teamsters on it. And I didn't like the way he said it, you know. I said, listen, Zach, who the hell are you talking to? I said, if I could hold this hearing and I wanted to, I would. I am not involved in it. So don't you go talking about any $100,000 or the teams to support me now in Hudson County. So I don't need you or anybody else. He said, oh, you're what, are you some kind of a tough guy? I said, no, but I'm not a pushover either. So I said, you stay out of this. And Roy, I'm telling you, I am not doing this. And then he said, Mr. Hoover will consider it a personal favor. And if you don't, he said, then you're not his friend. I said, I'm everybody's friend, Roy, but I'm nobody's whore. So I got rid of him, took him out of the office. That was the first major test with the fight with Hoover. Now, Roy was not an easy guy to shake off. And they had a couple other things, and I refused to do it. Now, Bobby's now running for president. I'm accelerating this. Bobby is now running for president, and Roy comes in with I come back to my office one night, and I'm signing my mail, it's a big stack of mail, and I see this letter from me to the Attorney General, Nick Katzenbach, demanding that he come before my committee and bring with him the authorizations and the transcripts of the bugging of Martin Luther King and with the authorizations for the bugging. And I said to my secretary, it's a letter from my signature. I said, Elizabeth, where the hell did this letter come from? Oh, she said, Mr. Cohn was here and gave it and said that you cleared it and would I put it on your stationery for your signature. I said, get that little son of a bitch on the phone right now. And I said, Roy, who the Christ are you think you're dealing with? Where'd this letter come from? And then Roy, when he got it, he said, you should talk like that. That's the way you used to talk, like that, you know. And he said, I'll come down there tomorrow. I have to talk to you. I said, Roy, you goddamn well got to talk to me. And so he comes down the next day. I said, who the hell ever gave you permission to dictate a letter for me? He said, Mr. Hoover and I drafted the letter. He said, it's got, here there's Kennedy's now, Bobby Kennedy's running for president, and he's helping all the black people. And here, look right here. And he showed me the authorization for the bugging of King, and it's got Bobby's name on it. And he said, we're going to blow that son of a bitch out of the water. I said, you blow anybody you want out of the water. And I said, but you're not going to blow me out of the water. And I said, you can. He said, well, Mr. Hoover, this is the last chance you're going to get. I said, you threatening me, you little bastard? And I went over and I grabbed him, and I was going to about throw him out of the window. I was so mad by now. And now he says, and he's running out the door, and he says, you'll be sorry, because if you're not their friend, you're Mr. Hoover's enemy. I said, F you and F Hoover too. And I was really angry about this. But right after that's when it started. The whole goddamn thing started. But from that day on, Hoover never let up on me. Then they floated those stories in Life magazine about a body in my basement, and it was torture, man. For 4 years, they never let up. It wasn't a question that people didn't want to believe this about Hoover. They feared even talking about it, about Hoover. Hoover was a cancer to this country, and it was a cancer to the Congress. You talk about behavioral modification. Hoover modified the behavior of the Congress, and through this guy, Deke DeLoach, who was sort of the hitman for Hoover's FBI in the Congress. he would bring over tapes that they had on various congressmen and said, you know, we're your friends and we're on your corner, but that meant that they owned them. They were tantamount to blackmail. He really was the number 3 guy in the FBI. And he's the guy, he was the hitman against the Congress. And if you stepped out of line, he was the guy who brought you in line over Mr. Hoover. He corrupted more goddamn congressmen than anybody during the Jackson days, okay? By threat and wiretaps. And an example, I came back one day and there was Congressman Rodino. You know who Rodino was? Rodino was the chairman of the impeachment committee, okay? But he was also chairman of the Judiciary Committee, okay? But before, he was only the number 3 guy in that day. And he came over and he was green. I said, Pete, what's the matter? Your eyes bothering? Because he had bad, tough eyes. He says, no. He says, Dick DeLoach is just in my office. And he says, thank God for friends. And DeLoach gives him tapes and says that, you know, Congressman, we got these bad guys in Newark saying things about you, like you're selling immigration private bills for $200, but we don't believe anything like that. Now, here, you take these tapes, and he gave it to them. Now, you know, from that minute on, they owned Rodino on it. And now I'm curious because now I'm in a war with the sons of bitches. And at least 7 or 8 people on that Judiciary Committee, the only ones who supervised, they had done the same thing with tapes and threats and whatever the hell it was. So that was DeLoach. Incidentally, DeLoach is the guy that put Jerry O'Leary, who won the Pulitzer Prize for the killing of Lee Harvey Oswald, put him in the tunnel next to Lee Harvey Oswald on it, and when put him next to Jack Ruby when Lee Harvey Oswald was killed. So this was one of the big goddamn operators in the whole spook community. And that was the way that worked in those days. It wasn't only him. As a result of that, I began to do another little spade work of how many people were approached in the Congress. Now, most of the members in the Congress had nothing to do with this sort of thing. And they didn't know what was going on. If you were on the Agricultural Committee, Interior Committee, or whatever it was, you had no reason to know about this. But if you were on the Appropriations Committee, who funded the FBI or the Justice Department, you were in it. If you were on the Judiciary Committee, who were in the top leadership, you came under their umbrella and under their threats on it. And there was another very decent man in the Congress who could have moved up on a committee, but he was the oversight committee for the FBI. And he was told, stay where you are. So if somebody would write in about an abuse of the FBI by Hoover or something, it was referred to his subcommittee. And of course, he being an ex-FBI man himself, that was the end of it. And that's the way it worked. And there was no forum. We had, and I will tell you this, I have never really said this much before, but when we were trying to figure out how to debug our offices and what to do about the 6 or 8 cases that we knew Hoover was bugging those offices, we had like cells. You wouldn't have meetings with a lot. You talk about maybe 3 or 4 people that you trusted and say, what the hell can we do about this? Because there weren't too many people you could trust there who had the connections or were under the gun or were being extorted by Hoover and his guys to control the Congress. And I'm not exaggerating when I say control the Congress. The top 3 or 4 people on that Judiciary Committee, they were owned by by Hoover on it. Poor Manny Seller was scared to death, as in the case of my personal experience with him in our privacy committee. So the way that they controlled, the only guy that committee that Hoover ever would appear to in both houses was a committee led by John Rooney of New York. He was the chairman of the subcommittee on Justice and State Department expenditures, and Hoover would just go into his office, and Rooney would give him 110% of everything that he asked for, and thank him very much for the honor of Mr. Hoover appearing before his committee. I mean, they own John Rooney, but nobody else in Congress he ever had to report to, and Rooney had 3 men on the commission, and one of them died, and a new member was a good friend of mine named John Slack from West Virginia. We went in together, and we were very, very friendly, and because he had been Attorney General in West Virginia, they put him on this subcommittee. It was a 3-man subcommittee, Rooney. And the day that Mr. Hoover came in, and what's his name's falling all over him, Rooney, as usual. And then he says to Slack, he says, "Do you have any questions?" And Slack asked Hoover a couple questions, innocuous questions. The next day, Rooney got a hold of me. He says, "Hey, you and that Slack are friendly, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah, we're friendly." He said, "You better warn him. Mr. Hoover wants him to know that he better, when he comes before that committee, keep his goddamn mouth shut." And he says, "I don't like the impertinence of him asking me questions in there." And he said, if he doesn't settle down, he'll have more trouble in his goddamn district that they can handle. That was the way they operated. I mean, this is the Congress of the United States. That this terrible man is modifying our behavior and our thinking and our ability to protect the people that elected us. Now I win the primary, and now I'm got 4 months to go with the election. Which, if you're nominated, you win the nomination. Normally, you should win in Hudson County. It's Democratic. So now I got a call from my lawyer in the middle of this war, and he said, "Neil, you've got to meet me at Newark Airport right away. I'm in Washington." He says, "You've got to do this, please." So I said, "Okay, I'll grab the shuttle." And I go to grab the shuttle, and I meet, his name is Larry Weissman. He's a good friend of mine. And with him is Roy Cohn, and they were friends. I knew they were friends. In fact, that's probably how I met Larry, and a good friend of mine named Neil Walsh. And they said they had just had a meeting in New York with Dick DeLoach, DeCarter DeLoach. Larry says, "Neil, I hate to tell you this, but you really have got to resign." I said, "Why do I have to resign? I just won the goddamn primary after all these life stories and all." He says, "Well, DeLoach says that if you don't resign, Mr. Hoover wants you out of Congress in 7 days. And if you don't resign in 7 days, there's going to be another story in Life magazine about your wife, and that this supposedly body in my basement on it, that he died sleeping with my wife in my hand. He was living in my house 5 days a week and died of a heart attack having intercourse with my wife. And my whole family's a bunch of goddamn pigs. I got 4 daughters. My mother-in-law lived with me and my wife. And now they're going to put another life story in about this. So, and then Roy is with him, confirming it, and Neil Walsh, who is a good friend of mine, he's confirming that he was at the meeting and that DeLoach said this. Well, by now, I don't care what the hell they were saying about me, it's politics, but now picking on my wife, who was a lovely, lovely woman, and my 4 daughters were all a bunch of goddamn pigs. So I said, okay. So then the next day, I'm up here and in Jersey, and I met Roy in New York. I think I met him at the New York AC or someplace, wherever the hell it was. And I said, Roy, I want you to check this letter. And he said, Neil, you're doing the right thing. I know Ricky. And he did. He knew my wife. We were social friends by that time. And he says, you're doing the right thing, resigning. And I said, well, Roy, you just check this. I said, I know you're a pretty smart guy, and just check it for grammar and punctuation, and see if there's anything wrong with it. And I read it, and he reads it, and he throws it up in the air, and he screams, oh, God, you can't say this, you can't say this kind of stuff. And I said, it's a letter that I am, now here's the letter, here's the speech I'm making. I said, because I got 3 more months left in Congress, even if I lose the November election. And every day, every congressman can make a speech at 12 o'clock, noontime, and insert speeches and revise and extend their remarks. And I said, I am making that goddamn speech every single day. And the speech was that I am no judge of a person's sexual mores or sexual proclivities. And I said, if 2 people of the same sex figure that's the way they want to live their lives, that is not up to me to judge them. But I said, on the other hand, Director J Edgar Hoover and the Deputy Director Hoover, DeLoach, not DeLoach, what the hell was his name? Clyde Tolson, I said, have spent 31 years together, having dinner and breakfast every single day of their lives. And now they go around the country, always go to some racetrack together, and they have armored cars picking them up, and all of this is done at government expense. Now, their sex lives is no great interest to me, though it is an interesting sex life, but I'm not judging them. But I do feel, as a member of the Government Operations Committee, that we have to look into this whole thing and hold a hearing as to why these expenditures by the FBI should be paying for these 2 men to be living in the same hotel rooms at night, going to the racetracks together, which they did, and wearing the same hats. I don't know whether the Government Operations Committee is paying for the hats or not, and I really stuck it to them. And Roy's going crazy. He said, Jesus Christ, you can't say this kind of stuff about Mr. Hoover. I said, why not? He said, where'd you get all this? I said, well, you know, Roy, this has been around a long time. And I said, so I'm just putting together a lot of the stories that I've heard about these 2 guys for a long time. And he said, well, you can't say. Well, I said, I'll make it up like they made up with the life stories. I said, I have the privilege, and I can say any goddamn thing I want. And every day between now and next November, or next January, my term ends, I will be making this goddamn speech with additional facts or fiction. It doesn't make any goddamn difference to me. But I will drive that old bastard into a heart attack long before I finish Congress. and you can go and tell them if I hear one goddamn word about my wife or anything. So I'm not resigning. And Roy said, you think I'm crazy to tell Mr. Hoover this? I said, oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you, Roy. I said, I have an addendum to that letter. I asked Mr. Roy Cohn to check this for accuracy, the good friend of Mr. Hoover, to check my speech as to accuracy, if there's anything in there that is untrue. And I would appreciate very much if Mr. Cohn would point these out. Mr. Cohn failed to say that anything was failed to deny any of it, and therefore I add this to the speech. He said, you son of a bitch, he's going crazy. And I said, what's going to happen after you're in there that you didn't help your buddy Hoover now, right, when I make these speeches? So anyway, that was how the hell I got them back. Anyway, so now the next day, I'm up in the country here. We had a house over about 20 miles from here. They fly a guy up, an FBI guy that I knew. And so Mr. Hoover wants to know why you're mad at him. I said, Jim, you're kidding, that son of a bitch. He had to roll those stories. He said, well, what can we do? I said, Jim, I'm not telling you what you can do or what you can't do, but I just want to tell you one thing. If I hear one goddamn word out of that old bastard about my wife or my kids, I said, he's finished. And I said, I am going to make this speech starting Monday when the House goes into session. Oh, wait. And he said, well, I got him to back off. I said, I don't give a shit whether he backs off or he doesn't back off. I said, that's just what I'm doing. Anyway, to make a long story short, they got the speaker and everything, and Hoover backs off, and he put the Niles of the body in the basement and all that kind of stuff. But then Nixon got in, and the whole thing started all over again. So there was so much of this that was going on, and nobody wanted to do anything about it. Or it wasn't that they didn't want to do anything about it. It was there was no official forum to consider these things, like the National Data Bank, and I think we held some 22, 23 various hearings on this, including what was going on up at Harvard, and where Harvard was getting more money from the Defense Intelligence Agency and the CIA than they were getting tuition during those days, doing these experiments on people, the O'Leary experiments, the Skinner experiments. Dr. Skinner, who raised his child in a box, got a $3 million grant from the government to study behavioral modification. Really? In fact, one of the fallouts of some of these Harvard studies were it was a Dr. Murray who knew how to get all of these grants on the drugging and the modification of the mind in order to make more perfect assassins and spies. One of the abortions of that program was where they would take these young geniuses and give them $15 a week to become subject of his experiments. One of them was Krasinski, the Unabomber, and I think there were 5 or 6 of these super intelligent mathematicians. I think 1 or 2 of them committed suicide. Krasinski became the mad Unabomber, and I think the only one who survived is a dishwasher out there, and the last I looked at it, California. But all of these things were going on in Harvard, and the O'Leary drug experiments that were going on. And part of that, we had somebody either thrown out of a window in New York. He was one of the leaders of one of these programs, or fell out of a window. I mean, there were so many things going on below the surface of what we thought was the great American way, And here was Congress really didn't want to see it. All of these people who killed the three of them, all of them denied it, and it was consistent with the studies that were going on and the experiments that were going on up there in Harvard in making assassins and making spies and making different soldiers. I think it was Henry Murray. The Murray experiments were to produce exactly those kind of people, which is where Krasinski, the Unabomber, he was one of the abortions of it. So nobody wants to make that connection that we really built people to do things like that on it. But the connection was there. We spent millions of dollars in grants up in the Harvard studies to create people who would do those kind of things and not know it on it. Sure, though, but nobody paid any attention to it. No, I've never seen anybody else make the connection on it. Hale Boggs was convinced there was a conspiracy, but Hale didn't make the connection with the Harvard studies where we were producing, we were experimenting to make these kind of robotic soldiers of the mind or something. I made that connection. Nobody paid any attention to it. Well, by this time, Boggs now sees me as an ally, and we were friends on it. We were friends. There was a possibility that if Hale moved up, I was going to be the House Whip and leadership role down there. And now Hale Boggs now started to make speeches about this too. And Hale Boggs, by this time, Hale was one of the seven, I think it was the 7 people on the Warren Commission that held a hearing on the Kennedy assassination. Now, he and Jim Garrison were classmates in law school. They were from Louisiana. Hale was from there and Garrison. And Hale became convinced that there was a little razzmatazz went on, and that the very issues that might bring the truth out in the assassination were obscured. And he then talked about reopening the Warren Commission. I never discussed this with Jerry Ford, but Jerry was the other member from the House of Representatives. But Hale became quite adamant about it. And he was convinced that the destruction of Jim Garrison was based on the fact that Garrison was right. There was a conspiracy. And that conspiracy to assassinate the president took place within his jurisdiction. And frankly, if you look at conspiracy indictments today, that would have been a home run, an easy one. But no one wanted to get involved. And finally, he brought the charges against Clay Shaw, that Clay Shaw group. And to this day, it remains a mystery. Here you had this group down there. Everybody admits they discuss killing the president. Everybody admits that Lee Harvey Oswald and Furry, who the pilot with the red wig, flew to Cuba. there's nobody doubts that Oswald was under the surveillance of the FBI from the day he came back, and yet how could he have done all of this without maybe the path being cleared for him? And I think Hale now began to feel this way. Hale was battered around very badly by Hoover and Deloach, like I was. And Hale nearly had a breakdown as a result of it. So this was a bipartisan effort. Before I even started this, I went to Jerry Ford, who was then minority leader, who was one of the most decent men ever in the goddamn Congress, or ever in the White House, incidentally. And because now, since I was getting a lot of press on this stuff, so every day when there'd be a roll call, different members of the Congress would be coming up and saying, Neil, Jesus, this happened in my city, or this happened in my town. Listen to this story. So I was being inundated with this stuff. I went over to Jerry, and I said, Jerry, talk to your guys. I mean, we really should do something about this. The Judiciary Committee won't touch it. But I said, we're living in a new world, an evolutionary world of technology that's affecting the democratic process, people's lives. And Jerry agreed with it. We worked on that, I don't know, for several months. We come up with a bill, bipartisan. He said he supported it. And we got and I worked out with the Manny Seller, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, that they had some certain reservations on turf grounds, jurisdictional grounds, and we worked the whole thing out, and that's how we obtained a rule to bring the bill to the floor, which in itself was a great accomplishment to even to get the rule on it. And that included old Judge goddamn Smith down there in Virginia, and we really had a good bipartisan support for all of this. So the day the bill came up on it, we were ready to start the debate. It's going to go through because we got all the votes we need. And Seller came over to me. He said, Neil, he said, I'm sorry. I said, what do you mean you're sorry? He said, I have to break my word, and I don't like to break my word. I said, what do you mean? He says, I have to oppose it on jurisdictional grounds. He says, the committee's going to oppose it. I said, how the hell could you do this the last minute? We're on the floor here. He said, I got a personal call from Mr. Hoover, and I'm telling you why, because I like you, and I like this idea. He said, I got a personal call this morning from Mr. Hoover, who said that if he does not oppose that bill on jurisdictional grounds, that they're going to indict my brother, because his brother, they had a law practice in New York, and Manny's, on one door was the brother, and the other was Manny's. So he said, I have to oppose it. He said, I hope you understand. I said, well, I understand what you're saying, but I said, it's incomprehensible to me that something like this could happen in the goddamn Congress. And that they had 36, I think it was 36 members in that committee. Only 4 of them voted for my bill, and the rest of them opposed. So there was no way we could pass on the bill. And I'll never forget Jerry Ford coming over and said, Neil, he said, I gave you my word I was going to support the bill. He says, it's going down. He says, if you want me to vote for it, I'll keep my word and I'll vote for it. But he said, if you want to relieve me of my word, he said, it will help me in my district if I oppose the bill rather than vote for it. It's a law enforcement kind of thing. I said, no, it's going down. So what the hell's the difference? So then they did. Which I always remember it was a wonderful gesture on it. And that was the last attempt to set up any kind of a permanent committee that would consider the impact of the new technology on the civil liberties of the American people and their civil rights. We were talking about civil rights, but at the same time, we were taking away the rights of everybody during those days in a nice, quiet manner by nobody accepting responsibility for the dehumanization that was going on the personal lives of everybody in the country. I always thought they blew the plane up. I always thought that. Because Hale was starting to make a lot of noise like I did. Although he was a more serious guy because he had been on a Warren Commission. And he came back and then wanted to reopen this Warren Commission. And then this plane mysteriously blew up. And those guys were not against things like that. Did somebody blow his goddamn plane up? Why not? They couldn't shut him up. They shut me up. They dismembered my Congress, my seat in the Congress. They indicted me. There was never any corruption or payoffs or bribes or anything. The judge said that. They indicted me, and the next day, they dismembered my congressional district. I had 5 cities. They gerrymandered me out of Congress and gave each one of my cities to an incumbent. How the hell could you beat an incumbent on it when you only have like one little city on it? And they never let up on Hale Boggs either, never. And to this day, nobody knows what the hell blew up Hale Boggs' plane either. But Hale was a bigger threat to them than I was because he was majority leader on it. And Hale's plane mysteriously blew up in Alaska. So there were very, very strange things going on in this country below the level of appearances, and the Congress was involved, and the Congress was a victim of it, a willing victim because everybody was scared, because the New York Times versus Sullivan case said you can lie about politicians as long as it eliminated all slander and libel laws. This put another great tool in the hands of law enforcement because you're an agent on one desk, you can write an anonymous letter to me at the next desk. That's enough to start an investigation on somebody, on it. And that's the way it worked. And then you could leak that there's an investigation going on to Life magazine or Look magazine or somebody like that. That became the threat to democracy where elected officials now were frail vessels with the slightest opposition to an agency. That agency could leak stories out to the new world of investigative reporters. I gave it a try. I gave it a try, and I smashed my whole career as a result of it. I'm not sorry, because what the hell would be the sense of staying down there and not being able to look into the mirror and everything? And I think the overall picture of the emergency, the emerging of the police apparatus, secret police apparatus in America, which really came to a head with the Kennedy assassination, is today bigger and stronger than ever. And you don't really have a Hoover around today, but you have a heck of a lot of guys with the power that Hoover had, who are a little more quiet and a little more efficient in the exercise of that kind of power. And I worry very much about what the hell is going to happen to this country unless people become aware of it. The frailty of reputation and the ability to destroy it is so widespread now. As long as people in the Congress don't raise these questions about the role of the secret government in America, or the secret governments in America, or the real role of the secret societies in America, as long as there's no protection for them, they can be destroyed overnight. So the power of destroying people is a lot easier even now than it was then. So in answer to your question, there's a lot of courageous guys down there. I'm sure most of the people who get elected are well-intentioned. We're all Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. You want to do the right thing on it. I'm speaking about the general people who seek an election. To take all the fire you have to take to be in public life, you've got to have something other than collecting money for fundraising or PACs. You want to make it a little better. And then you get down there and, being a congressman or senator is one of the greatest jobs in the world. I mean, the pay is okay now. You're a celebrity. Everybody's yes, congressman, no congressman, yes, and make way for the congressman and all of that. And that's great, except you come to a point where now you say, gee, I'm in this position. I've got what appears to be a lot of power, but I can't do anything about anything. Now it breaks your heart. Now it breaks your heart that you see what has to be done. You're close enough to see what has to be done, what should be done, what Congress as a whole could do, but can't do anymore. I think the most important lesson is if you have an issue that's worthwhile going to war about, you better damn well have an army behind you. I didn't.